I pulled the manila folder from behind my water heater for what I knew would be the last time. 15 years of hiding it there, wrapped in plastic, sealed against moisture and time and my own cowardice. My hands shook as I opened it, not from fear, but from something closer to relief. The photographs spilled across my kitchen table like accusations I'd been carrying too long. There it was, the sonar reading that had made Mildred gasp and Grace go pale. The creature, 3 miles across, resting on the Mariana Trench floor like it had been waiting for us. For me. I traced the outline with my finger, remembering how the bioelectric pulse had hit me the moment we'd gotten close enough. How my vision had exploded with images of ancient oceans, teeming with life that predated everything we thought we knew about evolution. How the military had shown up 12 hours later like they'd been expecting our call. The email from Mildred was still open on my laptop. Just coordinates and 5 words. They're planning another dive. I'd memorized those coordinates 15 years ago. They were burned into my brain along with everything else that had changed me that day. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to Sean Hayes' number. I'd been dodging his calls for 3 years, ever since he'd started sniffing around the edges of classified marine research. Tonight, his persistence was finally going to pay off. Hayes. His voice was sharp, alert despite the late hour. It's Lexi Garcia, from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. A pause. I could practically hear him scrambling for a pen. Dr. Garcia, I wasn't expecting... Can you meet me tonight? I have something you'll want to see. About the deep-sea research? The military contracts? I glanced toward my window. The street had been empty when I'd gotten home from work. Now there was a black sedan parked under the broken streetlight, positioned perfectly to watch my building. Among other things, Monterey Bay Aquarium. Main entrance. 2 hours. Dr. Garcia, if this is about what I think it's about, don't say anything else on this line. I was probably being paranoid, but paranoia had kept me alive and employed for 15 years. Just be there. I hung up and started gathering the evidence. The photographs went into my messenger bag first, then the water samples in their specialized containers. The biological readings that showed how my brain chemistry had changed after the encounter. The documentation proving Grace had been feeding information to the military weeks before we'd even found the creature. Everything I should have released the day they made me sign that non-disclosure agreement. I sealed the folder and slipped it into a waterproof case. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going to let them bury this again. Not when they were planning another dive. Not when there might be another creature down there, waiting. The sedan was still there when I left my building. I walked to my car normally, resisting the urge to look directly at it. After 15 years of silence, they probably figured I was harmless, a middle-aged marine biologist who'd learned to keep her mouth shut. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The drive to the aquarium took 20 minutes through empty Monterey streets. I kept checking my rearview mirror, but the sedan didn't follow. Either they knew where I was going, or they'd decided I wasn't worth the effort anymore. Both possibilities worried me. I parked near the main entrance and sat in my car for a moment, looking at the dark building where I'd spent the last decade and a half pretending to be a normal scientist, studying jellyfish and sea otters and other creatures that wouldn't get me disappeared if I published papers about them. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The coordinates have changed. New dive scheduled for next week. They know about the others. The others. My stomach dropped. We'd always suspected the creature we'd found wasn't alone, but we'd never had proof. If Mildred was right, if there were more of them, then what we'd witnessed 15 years ago was just the beginning. I got out of my car and walked toward the aquarium entrance, the evidence heavy in my bag. Sean Hayes was already there, a wiry man with ink-stained fingers, and the kind of intense eyes that made sources either trust him completely or run in the opposite direction. Tonight, I was betting everything on trust. Dr. Garcia, he stepped forward, extending his hand. I have to say, I never thought you'd actually call. Neither did I. I shook his hand, noting the slight tremor in my own. But some things are more important than self-preservation. He pulled out a small recording device. Do you mind if I... Not here. I glanced around the empty plaza. Too exposed. Let's walk. We headed toward the harbor, our footsteps echoing off the concrete. The ocean stretched out before us, dark and infinite, hiding secrets that governments would kill to protect. How much do you know about deep-sea research programs? I asked. Enough to know they're not all about mapping thermal vents. Sean's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd been proven right. I've been tracking funding patterns, personnel transfers, equipment purchases. There's a whole shadow program operating under civilian research covers. What if I told you it was bigger than that? What if I told you we found something down there that changed everything we thought we knew about life on Earth? Sean stopped walking. I'd say you just became the most important source I've ever had. I reached into my bag and pulled out one of the photographs. Even in the dim harbor lighting, the creature's bioluminescent patches were visible, alien and beautiful, and terrifying. 15 years ago, my research team discovered this in the Mariana Trench. 12 hours later, the military confiscated everything and made us sign agreements that should have kept us quiet forever. Sean stared at the photograph, his journalist's skepticism warring with obvious amazement. What is it? We don't know. Something ancient. Something that communicated with me in ways I'm still trying to understand. I took a breath. Something they killed, rather than let the world know it existed. And you have proof of all this? I patted my bag. Enough to end careers and start congressional investigations. But that's not why I'm talking to you now. Then why? I showed him Mildred's text. Because they're planning to do it again. And this time, I'm not going to stay silent. Sean looked from the photograph to the text and back to me. Dr. Garcia, do you understand what you're asking me to do? If this is real, if this is as big as you're suggesting, it'll be the story of your career, maybe the story of the century. I met his eyes, but only if you're willing to see it through to the end, no matter where it leads. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face in the harbor lights. What do you need from me? Help me find my former research partners. Help me stop whatever they're planning. And help me make sure the world knows the truth about what's really living in our oceans. Sean nodded slowly. When do we start? Now. I handed him the photograph. Because if Mildred's right, we may already be too late. The jellyfish drifted through their tank like living ghosts, their translucent bodies pulsing with an otherworldly rhythm that made my chest tight. Sean stood beside me, close enough that I could smell coffee and cigarettes on his jacket, his eyes reflecting the blue glow of the exhibit lighting. So you're telling me this whole thing started as a geology mission? He kept his voice low, but I could hear the skepticism creeping in. Mapping thermal vents? That's what they told us. I watched a moon jelly contract and expand, its simple nervous system somehow managing to keep it alive in an environment that would kill most complex organisms. The funding came through Meridian Research Solutions, which was supposedly a private marine consulting firm. It took me 3 years to trace it back through shell companies and dummy corporations to figure out where the money actually came from. Sean pulled out a small notebook, the kind reporters used before everything went digital. His fingers were stained with ink, like he'd been writing by hand for hours. Defense Department? Eventually. But the trail was so convoluted that even Grace didn't know who was really paying for the mission. At least, that's what I thought at the time. I moved away from the jellyfish tank, heading toward the deeper part of the exhibit where the lighting was dimmer. Grace Murray was our marine engineer. Brilliant woman, could design equipment that would work 3 miles underwater like she was building a toaster. Still is as far as I know, but she's not exactly returning my calls these days. I stopped in front of a display about bioluminescence, the irony making my stomach twist. The thing is, Grace started acting weird about 3 weeks before we shipped out, making phone calls at odd hours, always stepping away when the rest of the team was around. Sean scribbled something in his notebook. Weird how? She'd get these encrypted messages on a separate device, not her regular phone or the mission communication equipment, something personal that she kept locked in her cabin. I could still picture Grace hunched over that black device, her face lit by its screen in the pre-dawn darkness of the ship. And she was accessing files she shouldn't have had clearance for, mission parameters, equipment specifications, even our personal background checks. You saw her doing this? Mildred did. Mildred Willis, our marine biologist. She was always up early, liked to review data before the rest of us were awake. I touched the glass of the bioluminescence display, remembering how Mildred's face had looked when she'd told me what she'd seen, confused and hurt, like she'd caught a friend stealing. Grace told us she was just being thorough, making sure all the equipment would integrate properly, but the files she was looking at had nothing to do with engineering. Sean looked up from his notebook. What kind of files? Biological sampling protocols, deep-sea specimen preservation techniques, camera equipment designed for documenting new species discoveries. I turned away from the display, scanning the exhibit for other visitors. We were alone, except for a security guard who was more interested in his phone than us. They told us we were mapping thermal vents, but they gave us tools for finding and cataloging life forms. So someone knew you might find something. Someone knew we would find something. The certainty in my voice surprised even me. The coordinates weren't random. We weren't exploring uncharted territory. We were sent to a very specific location in the Mariana Trench, to a depth where no one had any business looking for geological features. Sean stopped writing. How specific? Specific enough that Grace had the exact GPS coordinates programmed into her personal device 2 weeks before we received our official mission briefing. I could still remember the numbers, burned into my memory, along with everything else from that day. When I asked her about it, she said she'd been doing preliminary research. But preliminary research doesn't usually involve coordinates accurate to within 10 meters. Jesus. Sean closed his notebook and looked at me directly. Dr. Garcia, what exactly did you find down there? I glanced around the exhibit again. The security guard had moved closer, still looking at his phone, but positioned where he could hear our conversation if he wanted to. Not here. This is already more than I should be saying in public. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small brass key, the metal warm from being pressed against my body. Storage Unit 247 at Seaside Self-Storage on Del Monte Avenue. Meet me there in 2 hours. Sean took the key, his fingers brushing mine. What's in the storage unit? Everything they thought they'd destroyed. Everything they made us promise never to talk about. I started walking toward the exit, forcing him to follow. The real mission parameters, the equipment specifications they didn't want us to see ahead of time, and photographs of what we actually found. Photographs of what? I stopped walking and turned to face him. Something that's been living in our oceans since before humans existed. Something that changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. Something they killed rather than let the world know it was there. Sean's eyes widened, but before he could respond, I was moving again, heading for the exit. 2 hours, Mr. Hayes, and come alone. I pushed through the aquarium's front doors and stepped into the cool Monterey evening. The parking lot was half empty, most of the day's visitors long gone. I walked toward my car at a normal pace, resisting the urge to look around for watchers. But I didn't need to look. The black sedan was parked 3 rows away from my Honda, positioned perfectly to observe both my car and the aquarium entrance. Same model as the one outside my apartment, same tinted windows, same government-issue anonymity. What bothered me wasn't that they were watching. After 15 years of silence, I'd expected them to notice when I finally started talking. What bothered me was how obvious they were being about it. The sedan was parked under a working streetlight, clearly visible to anyone who cared to look. Either my watchers had gotten sloppy, or they wanted me to know I was being followed. Neither possibility was particularly comforting. I got into my car and started the engine, checking my rearview mirror as I pulled out of the parking space. The sedan's headlights came on, but it didn't follow me immediately. Professional surveillance would have used multiple vehicles, rotating coverage to avoid detection. This felt more like intimidation than investigation. Or maybe they just didn't think I was worth the effort anymore. A middle-aged marine biologist who'd kept her mouth shut for 15 years, finally having a breakdown and talking to a journalist who specialized in conspiracy theories. They probably figured Sean would dismiss me as another crackpot with government paranoia. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I drove through downtown Monterey, taking a deliberately indirect route toward Seaside. The sedan followed at a distance, making no effort to hide its presence. By the time I reached the storage facility, I was certain they wanted me to know they were there. The question was why. The storage unit smelled like dust and old cardboard, but underneath that was something else. The faint metallic scent of scientific equipment that had been sitting unused for too long. I pulled the chain on the overhead bulb, and harsh fluorescent light flooded the cramped space, illuminating stacks of boxes I'd been adding to for 15 years. Sean stepped inside behind me, his eyes already scanning the labels I'd written in careful block letters. Jesus, Lexi. How much stuff did you manage to save? More than they think. I moved to the box marked Sonar Data 2009 and pulled off the tape. Grace thought she'd confiscated everything when she handed over our official equipment, but she forgot that I'm paranoid about data backup. I lifted out the first sonar printout and spread it across the top of a nearby box. Even in the harsh light, the image was unmistakable, a massive object resting on the Mariana Trench floor, its edges clearly defined against the surrounding seafloor. Sean leaned closer, his journalist's skepticism warring with obvious amazement. How big is this thing? Roughly 3 miles in diameter, maybe more. I traced the outline with my finger, the same gesture I'd made 1,000 times over the past 15 years. The sonar couldn't penetrate very deep, but what we could see suggested it was at least half a mile thick. Could be geological, some kind of underwater mountain, or that's what we thought at first. I reached into another box and pulled out a waterproof case until we got close enough to take pictures. The photographs were still crisp after all these years, protected by the specialized storage materials I'd stolen from the lab. I laid them out in sequence, watching Sean's face change as he processed what he was seeing. The first image showed something that looked almost like a jellyfish, if jellyfish could grow to the size of cities. Translucent flesh stretched across an impossible expanse, shot through with veins of bioluminescent blue and green. But it was the second photograph that always made people stop breathing. Are those... Sean picked up the image, holding it closer to the light. Are those smaller creatures inside it? Mildred thought they might be symbiotic organisms, like cleaner fish, but I shrugged. We didn't have time to study them properly before Grace insisted we surface. The smaller creatures were clearly visible through the larger organism's translucent body, moving with purpose through what looked like internal chambers or passages. Some were elongated and serpentine, others more compact and geometric. All of them glowed with the same bioluminescent patterns as their host. Sean set the photograph down carefully. Mildred Willis, your marine biologist. What was her theory about what this thing actually was? She thought it might be a previously unknown species of Hunidarian, something that had evolved in the deep trenches, possibly millions of years old. I pulled out Mildred's field notes, her precise handwriting still legible after all these years. The size was unprecedented, but the basic body structure seemed consistent with other deep-sea jellies. Seemed consistent? I hesitated. This was the part I'd never told anyone, not even in the statement I'd given to the military investigators. The creature communicated with me. Sean looked up from the photographs. Communicated how? Not through sound. Not through any conventional means. I touched my temple, remembering the sensation that had flooded through my skull when we'd gotten within 100 meters of the creature. Some kind of bioelectric field that affected my nervous system directly. I experienced images, visions, I guess you'd call them. Visions of what? Earth's ancient oceans. Millions of years ago, before humans, before most of the life forms we recognize today. The memories were still vivid, more real than most of my actual experiences. I saw oceans teeming with creatures like this one, massive, intelligent organisms that lived in harmony with their environment. And then something happened, some kind of cataclysmic event that drove them deeper, forced them to hide in the deepest trenches. Sean was writing again, his pen moving quickly across the page. How long did this communication last? Maybe 10 minutes. Long enough for me to understand that what we'd found wasn't just a new species. It was a survivor. Possibly the last of its kind. I reached into the storage case and pulled out a small container, about the size of a coffee mug. And long enough for me to collect this. The water sample still glowed faintly after 15 years, a soft blue-green luminescence that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Sean stared at it, his pen forgotten. The bioluminescent organisms are still alive? Still active anyway. I've been monitoring them for 15 years, and they show no signs of degradation. I held the container up to the light, watching the microscopic organisms swirl in their preserved environment. Whatever these things are, they're incredibly resilient. And Grace knew about this? About the communication? Grace knew something was happening. She was monitoring our equipment when the bioelectric pulse hit, and she saw the reading spike. I set the container down and pulled out another set of documents. But she didn't wait to find out what it meant. The moment the pulse ended, she started insisting we had to surface immediately. Equipment malfunction, she said. Potential hull breach. Sean looked up from his notes. But there wasn't actually a malfunction. Our equipment was functioning perfectly. Better than perfectly, actually. The bioelectric field seemed to enhance our instrument's sensitivity. I spread out Grace's equipment logs, pointing to the timestamps. But look at this. While she was telling us we had to surface, she was secretly collecting samples and transmitting data to an encrypted receiver. The logs showed a clear pattern of unauthorized data transmission, all of it happening during the brief window when I was experiencing the creature's communication. Grace had been busy while I was having my mind expanded by an ancient intelligence. She was reporting to someone who knew exactly what we'd found and exactly what to do about it. I pulled out the final piece of evidence, a photograph I'd taken through the submersible's porthole as we surfaced. Military vessels appeared on the horizon within 6 hours of our return to the surface. They converged on our position with the kind of precision that only comes from advanced planning. Sean studied the photograph, counting the ships. How many? 7 vessels. 2 destroyers, 3 research ships, and 2 submarines. I could still remember the sick feeling in my stomach as I'd watched them approach. They knew exactly where we'd been and exactly what we'd found. The only way that was possible was if Grace had been feeding them information throughout the mission. So this whole thing was a setup from the beginning. Not a setup exactly. I think they genuinely wanted to know what was down there, but they also wanted to make sure they could control what happened to any discoveries. I started gathering the photographs and documents, preparing to pack them away again. Grace was their insurance policy, their way of making sure that if we found something significant, they'd be the first to know about it. Sean closed his notebook and looked around the storage unit, taking in the boxes of evidence I'd been accumulating for 15 years. Lexi, do you understand what you're sitting on here? This isn't just a story about government cover-ups. If what you're telling me is true, this could change everything we know about life on Earth. I know. I sealed the container with the water sample and placed it carefully back in its protective case. That's why they killed it. Killed it? 2 weeks after we returned, I felt something I'd never experienced before or since. A massive disturbance in the ocean's bioelectric field, like a scream that went straight through my nervous system. I turned off the overhead light, plunging us back into darkness. The next day, news reports described unusual seismic activity in the Mariana Trench region, officially attributed to tectonic shifts. Sean's voice came from the darkness beside me. But you think they used some kind of weapon? I think they decided that an ancient, intelligent creature living in our oceans was too dangerous to allow to exist. I pulled the storage unit door closed and locked it. And I think they're about to make the same decision again. The horizon was still dark when I heard the helicopters. I'd been awake for hours anyway, lying in my narrow bunk and listening to the ship's engines change pitch as we held position over the creature. The bioelectric sensation hadn't stopped since yesterday, a constant low-level hum in my skull that made sleep impossible. Every few minutes I'd feel a pulse of something that might have been curiosity or might have been pain, and I'd wonder if the creature below was trying to understand us the same way I was trying to understand it. The helicopter rotors cut through the pre-dawn quiet like chainsaws. Multiple aircraft approaching fast from the northeast. I rolled out of my bunk and pressed my face to the porthole, watching running lights descend through the darkness toward our deck. What the hell? Mildred's voice came from the bunk above mine, groggy but alert. She'd been having trouble sleeping too, though for different reasons. The water samples we'd collected were showing biological activity, unlike anything in the literature. And she'd spent most of the night running tests that kept producing impossible results. I pulled on my clothes and headed for the corridor. Grace's cabin door was already open, her bunk empty. Either she was an early riser, or she'd known this was coming. The deck was chaos by the time I made it topside. 3 military helicopters had landed on our research platform, and armed personnel were already securing the area. They moved with the kind of efficiency that comes from detailed planning, not improvised response. Someone had known exactly what they'd find on the ship. Dr. Garcia. The voice belonged to a woman in military dress uniform, tall and silver-haired, with the kind of bearing that made everyone around her stand straighter. I'm Colonel Doris Cole. I need to speak with your research team immediately. She didn't wait for my response, just gestured toward the main lab, where Mildred was already being escorted by 2 soldiers. Grace stood near the equipment lockers, her face carefully neutral, but I caught her exchanging a look with Colonel Cole that lasted a fraction of a second too long. Under the authority of National Security Directive 847, Cole continued, producing a folder thick with official documents. All research materials collected during this mission are now classified. Your computers, samples, and recording equipment will be transferred to military custody for evaluation. Mildred stepped forward, her scientist's instincts overriding her shock. Colonel, we've discovered what appears to be a previously unknown species of deep-sea organism. The biological implications alone. Dr. Willis. Cole's voice cut through Mildred's protest like a blade. The organism you've encountered represents a potential biological weapon and a direct threat to coastal populations. Your scientific observations, while noted, are secondary to national security concerns. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How do you know what we found? Cole turned those gray eyes on me, and I saw calculation there, not surprise. Dr. Garcia, your team has been operating in international waters above a known geological anomaly. We've been monitoring the situation. Monitoring how? Mildred's voice had an edge now. We only discovered the creature yesterday. There's no way you could have. The creature has been under surveillance for some time. Cole gestured to her team, who were already disconnecting our computers and sealing our sample containers in military cases. What you discovered yesterday was not a new species, Dr. Willis. It was a specimen that has been dormant for an extended period and recently became active. The bioelectric hum in my skull spiked suddenly, and I had to grab the lab bench to keep from staggering. For just a moment, I felt something that might have been fear. Not my fear, but something vast and ancient and confused. The creature knew something was wrong. Grace moved closer to Colonel Cole, and I caught a fragment of their conversation. Neutralization protocol. Next week. Minimal environmental impact. Neutralization. They weren't planning to study the creature. They were planning to kill it. You can't do this. The words came out louder than I'd intended, drawing everyone's attention. That creature is intelligent. It communicated with me. You can't just destroy something we don't understand. Cole studied me with new interest. Communicated how, Dr. Garcia? I hesitated, suddenly aware that anything I said could be used to justify whatever they were planning. Bioelectric fields, some kind of electromagnetic interaction with my nervous system. And what did this communication convey? Images, memories maybe, of ancient oceans, other creatures like this one. I looked around the lab, watching soldiers pack away 15 years of my career in unmarked boxes. It's not hostile. It's just old and alone. Cole made a note in her folder. Dr. Garcia, you've been exposed to an unknown biological agent that has demonstrably affected your neurological function. Your perceptions may not be reliable. My perceptions are fine. But even as I said it, I could feel the creature's presence in my mind. A constant whisper of electromagnetic noise that definitely hadn't been there a week ago. The creature isn't a weapon. It's a survivor. A survivor of what? I didn't have an answer for that. The images I'd received were fragmented, incomplete. Ancient seas, massive forms moving through deep water, then darkness and silence that stretched across geological time. Whatever had happened to the creature's kind, It had happened long before humans existed. "The specimen will be neutralized next week," Cole announced, closing her folder. "Dr. Murray will coordinate the technical aspects of the operation." Grace nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "The electromagnetic pulse generator should be sufficient. Minimal collateral damage to the surrounding ecosystem." Electromagnetic pulse. They were going to fry the creature's nervous system, the same nervous system that had reached out to mine with something like curiosity. I felt sick. "You're making a mistake," Mildred said quietly. "We don't know enough about this organism to predict the consequences of killing it. The bioelectric fields it generates could be connected to larger oceanic systems. Destroying it might cause cascading effects we can't anticipate. The risk of leaving it alive outweighs the risk of neutralization," Cole replied. "The decision has been made." She turned to address all three of us. "You will each sign non-disclosure agreements regarding this mission. The documents include specific provisions regarding deep-sea organisms, bioelectric phenomena, and potential biological weapons. Violation of these agreements carries penalties up to and including life imprisonment." The NDAs were already prepared, printed on official letterhead with our names filled in. They'd known exactly who would be on this mission and exactly what we'd find. This whole thing had been planned from the beginning. I signed the papers because I didn't have a choice, but I made sure to read every word. The language was specific in ways that made my skin crawl. References to ancient biological entities, electromagnetic communication, and potential consciousness manifestation in non-human organisms. They knew. They'd known all along what was down there. As the Intrepid was escorted back toward port by two military vessels, I stood at the stern rail and watched the coordinates where we'd found the creature disappear behind us. The bioelectric sensation was fading with distance, but I could still feel an echo of it, like a song playing just below the threshold of hearing. Grace joined me at the rail, her face carefully composed. "Lexi, I know you're angry, but how long have you been working for them?" She was quiet for a long moment. 3 years, since before this mission was even planned. So none of this was real. The research grant, the geological survey, all of it was just cover for a military operation. The research was real. We genuinely didn't know what we'd find down there. Grace gripped the rail, her knuckles white. But yes, I was supposed to monitor the mission and report any discoveries that might have defense implications. Defense implications. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. That creature has been sleeping on the ocean floor for millions of years. What kind of threat could it possibly pose? You felt what it did to your mind, Lexi. Imagine that same effect amplified, broadcast across a wider area. Imagine what would happen if someone figured out how to weaponize that kind of bioelectric manipulation. So you're going to kill it to prevent someone else from exploiting it. I'm going to follow orders. But her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Sometimes, that's all you can do. That night, I lay in my bunk and listened to the ship's engines carry us away from the creature. The bioelectric sensation was almost gone now, just a faint whisper at the edge of my consciousness. But around midnight, I felt something new. A massive pulse of electromagnetic energy that hit my nervous system like a physical blow. Pain. Terror. And then nothing. I pressed my face to the porthole and stared back toward the coordinates we'd left behind. But there was only darkness. Whatever I'd felt, it was over now. In the corridor outside my cabin, I heard Grace's voice through her door, talking quietly on what sounded like a satellite phone. I know how it had to end. No, I don't like it either. But we didn't have a choice. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, but the silence in my head felt wrong now. For 2 days, I'd carried the presence of something ancient and vast and curious. Now that presence was gone, and I felt more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The creature was dead. I was sure of it. And somehow, I was the only one who would remember what it had really been. The storage unit felt smaller, with both of us crammed inside, surrounded by 15 years of carefully preserved evidence. Sean was still staring at the photographs when I pulled out the folder I'd been dreading to show him. There's something else you need to understand about Grace. I opened the manila folder and spread out a series of documents across the makeshift table we'd created from stacked boxes. Her involvement wasn't accidental. Sean looked up from the creature photos, his journalist instincts immediately sharpening. What do you mean? I mean, Grace Murray had been working as a military consultant for 3 years before she ever joined our research team. I pointed to the first document, a contract dated 2006, 3 years before our mission. Her official title was Technical Advisor for Deep Sea Defense Applications. Sean leaned closer, scanning the contract details. How did you get this? Took me 8 years to track down. Turns out when you're paranoid enough and patient enough, you can find almost anything buried in government databases. I flipped to the next page. Look at her assignment parameters. Sean read aloud. Monitor civilian research operations for discoveries with potential defense applications or security implications. Report findings to designated military liaison within 12 hours of initial contact. He looked up at me. She was a spy. She was insurance, the military's way of making sure they'd know immediately if any civilian research team stumbled across something significant. I pulled out another document. And look at this. Her assignment was specifically focused on deep-sea organisms and bioelectric phenomena. They knew something was down there. They knew something might be down there. The difference is important. I gathered the contract papers and moved to another box. But here's what really bothers me about the whole thing. I pulled out a medical file, my own medical file, stolen from the military facility where they'd examined me after our return. The pages were filled with brain scans, blood work, and neurological assessments that painted a picture I was still trying to understand. 2 weeks after we returned from the mission, I felt something I'd never experienced before or since. I touched my temple, remembering the sensation that had hit me like a physical blow. A massive disturbance in the ocean's bioelectric field, like a scream that went straight through my nervous system. Sean was writing again, but his pen had slowed. When exactly? March 15th, 2009, around 11:30 p.m. Pacific Time. The date was burned into my memory. The next day, news reports described unusual seismic activity in the Mariana Trench region, officially attributed to tectonic shifts. But you think they killed it? I know they killed it. I opened the medical file to a page showing brainwave patterns. Look at this EEG reading from my post-mission examination. See these spikes in electromagnetic sensitivity? They appear exactly when I felt that disturbance. Sean studied the medical data, his expression growing more serious. You're saying you felt the creature die? I'm saying whatever they used to kill it sent a pulse through the ocean's bioelectric field, strong enough to affect my nervous system from 3,000 miles away. I flipped to another page showing blood chemistry analysis. And the changes weren't temporary. The medical reports painted a clear picture of permanent neurological alterations, enhanced electromagnetic sensitivity, increased neural activity in regions associated with spatial awareness, and blood chemistry changes that suggested ongoing exposure to unknown biological agents. Lexi, this is... Sean trailed off, staring at the brain scans. This proves you were physically changed by the encounter. It proves I'm not the same person who went down in that submersible. I closed the medical file and reached for another box. And it explains why I knew something was wrong when Mildred sent that text about the new coordinates. Sean looked up. You tried to contact her after the mission? I tried to contact both of them, Mildred and Grace. I pulled out a folder filled with phone records, email printouts, and official correspondence. Mildred had supposedly taken a position with an Antarctic research station. But when I called the station, they told me no one by that name worked there. She disappeared. She was disappeared. There's a difference. I showed Sean the employment records I'd managed to obtain. According to official databases, Dr. Mildred Willis accepted a position with the Palmer Research Station in Antarctica on April 2, 2009. But according to Palmer Station's actual personnel records, no one by that name has ever been employed there. Sean was writing faster now, his pen scratching across the page. What about Grace? Grace was reassigned to a classified marine project. Her contact information was scrubbed from all databases, her previous employment history redacted. I pulled out a series of dead-end correspondence. I spent 2 years trying to track her down through official channels. Every inquiry was met with the same response. No information available due to national security restrictions. So they scattered your team. They eliminated our team, made sure we could never compare notes or collaborate on what we'd experienced. I moved to the final box, the one I'd been saving for last. But that's not the worst part. Sean looked up from his notes. There's worse. There's a pattern. I opened the box and pulled out a thick folder filled with newspaper clippings, research papers, and government documents I'd collected over 15 years. Similar incidents have been occurring in other deep-sea research missions for the past 2 decades. I spread out the evidence chronologically. A 1995 mission in the Puerto Rico Trench that discovered unusual bioluminescent organisms, followed by immediate military intervention and researcher reassignments. A 2003 expedition in the Japan Trench that reported electromagnetic anomalies, then had all findings classified and team members transferred to separate projects. A 2007 mission in the Peru-Chile Trench that found evidence of large-scale biological activity, only to have their research vessel impounded and their data confiscated. Every single case follows the same pattern, I explained, pointing to the timeline I'd constructed. Civilian researchers find something unusual in deep ocean trenches. Military forces intervene within hours. All evidence is classified, and the research teams are disbanded. Sean was staring at the timeline, his face pale. How many incidents? 14 confirmed cases over 23 years, and those are just the ones I could document. I pulled out a map showing the locations of all the incidents. Look at the distribution. The red pins marking each incident were scattered across the world's major ocean trenches: the Mariana, Puerto Rico, Japan, Peru, Chile, Kermadec, and others. But there was a pattern to their placement, a systematic coverage of the deepest parts of Earth's oceans. They're not random discoveries, Sean said, studying the map. Someone's been conducting a systematic search. Someone's been conducting a systematic suppression campaign. I gathered the documents and prepared to pack them away. The question is whether they're trying to protect these creatures or eliminate them. Sean closed his notebook and looked around the storage unit one more time. Lexi, what you're describing isn't just a cover-up. It's a coordinated effort spanning decades to hide evidence of ancient marine life. It's bigger than that. I reached into the medical file and pulled out the final document, a brain scan taken just last month, showing that the neurological changes
We're still progressing 15 years after my encounter. I'm not just a witness to what happened. I'm living proof that contact with these creatures permanently alters human biology.
Sean stared at the recent brain scan, comparing it to the earlier images. The changes are still happening? They're accelerating. My electromagnetic sensitivity has increased dramatically over the past year. I can sense weather patterns days before they develop, predict tidal changes with impossible accuracy, and sometimes... I hesitated, not sure how much to reveal. Sometimes I feel things in the ocean that shouldn't be possible to detect from land. What kind of things? Movement. Large-scale biological activity in deep water. And recently, something that feels like communication attempts. I sealed the medical file and placed it back in its protective case. That's how I knew Mildred's text was legitimate. I'd been sensing increased activity in the Mariana Trench region for weeks before her message arrived. Sean was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I'd shown him. If what you're telling me is true, then you're not just a source for this story. You're part of it. I've been part of it since the moment that creature touched my mind. I turned off the overhead light and prepared to lock up the storage unit. The question is whether you're ready to be part of it too. Sean followed me out into the cool Monterey night, his notebook clutched tightly in his hand. What do you mean? I mean, once you publish this story, you'll become a target just like I am. They'll try to discredit you, silence you, maybe worse. I locked the storage unit and pocketed the key. Are you prepared for that? Sean looked back at the storage facility, then at me. Lexi, if even half of what you've shown me tonight is true, then this is the most important story of our lifetime. Maybe of any lifetime. It is, but it's also the most dangerous. I started walking toward my car, checking the shadows for any sign of surveillance. Because if I'm right about what's happening in the Mariana Trench, then we're not just dealing with government cover-ups anymore. We're dealing with the possibility that humanity is about to make first contact with an intelligence that's been waiting in our oceans for millions of years. The federal agents arrived at my apartment before I'd even finished my morning coffee. I heard the knock, 3 sharp raps that somehow managed to sound official, and knew immediately this wasn't a neighbor or delivery person. Through the peephole, I saw 2 people in dark suits standing with the kind of posture that screamed government training. Dr. Garcia? The woman held up a badge when I opened the door. Agent Sarah Chen, FBI. This is Agent Rodriguez. We need to discuss your recent media activities. I stepped back to let them in, my mind racing. Sean's article had gone live on his blog at midnight, 3 days after our meeting at the storage unit. By morning, it had been picked up by major news outlets. By afternoon, it was trending on social media with hashtags like Deep Sea Cover-Up and Ancient Ocean Life. Coffee? I offered, mostly to buy myself time to think. Agent Chen shook her head. Dr. Garcia, we're here about the classified information you shared with journalist Sean Hayes. I'm not sure what you mean. The lie felt automatic, even though we all knew it was pointless. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and showed me screenshots of Sean's article. The headline read, Government Killed Ancient Ocean Creature to Hide Evidence of Non-Human Intelligence. Below it were the photographs I'd given him, the sonar readings, the creature's bioluminescent form, even some of the medical data showing my neurological changes. These images were classified under National Security Directive 847, Chen said. Publishing them constitutes a federal crime. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd first opened that manila folder 3 days ago. So you're here to arrest me? That depends on your willingness to cooperate. Rodriguez closed the tablet and leaned forward. Dr. Garcia, we're not here to deny what you experienced 15 years ago. The organism you encountered was real. And yes, it was neutralized. The casual way he said neutralized made my stomach clench. You killed it. We prevented an ecological disaster. Chen's voice was matter of fact. Dr. Garcia, what you and your team discovered wasn't just a single creature. It was one of several ancient organisms that have been dormant in oceanic trenches for millions of years. I felt that familiar electromagnetic hum starting in the back of my skull. Several. Climate change and deep-sea mining activities have been triggering awakening events across multiple trench systems. Rodriguez pulled out a map showing red dots scattered across the world's deepest ocean areas. The electromagnetic fields these creatures generate can disrupt global communication systems, interfere with marine navigation, and destabilize entire oceanic ecosystems. Chen took over. The creature your team found had already begun affecting shipping lanes in the Pacific. Vessels were reporting compass malfunctions, electronic failures, and unusual marine behavior across a 1,000-square-mile area. So you decided to kill it rather than study it. We decided to prevent a potential catastrophe. Rodriguez's tone suggested this was a conversation he'd had before. Dr. Garcia, imagine what would happen if one of these creatures awakened near a major shipping route or underwater communication cable. The economic impact alone would be devastating. I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the Monterey Bay. Somewhere out there, in trenches I'd never seen, more creatures like the one I'd encountered might be stirring to life after millions of years of sleep. What do you want from me? We want to offer you a choice. Chen joined me at the window. You can face prosecution for violating your non-disclosure agreement and sharing classified materials. The penalties include up to 20 years in federal prison. Or you can join a new research program studying these organisms. Your unique neurological changes make you valuable to our efforts. I turned to face her. What kind of research program? Rodriguez answered. The Deep Ocean Intelligence Project. Our goal is to understand these creatures' capabilities and intentions while developing methods to prevent conflicts between their activities and human interests. You mean you want to figure out how to control them? We want to figure out how to coexist with them. Chen's voice carried a note of sincerity that surprised me. Dr. Garcia, we've learned that simply destroying these organisms isn't sustainable. They're too numerous, too widespread, and too deeply integrated into oceanic systems we don't fully understand. The electromagnetic sensation in my head was getting stronger. I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to ease the pressure. Where is this program located? Multiple facilities, but the primary research station is in Hawaii, positioned over the Haleakala Deep. Rodriguez watched my reaction carefully. Dr. Garcia, are you experiencing electromagnetic sensitivity right now? I nodded, not trusting my voice. That's another reason we need you. Your neurological changes have been progressing, haven't they? Becoming more pronounced over the past year? How do you know that? Chen and Rodriguez exchanged a look. Because you're not the only one. Dr. Garcia, there are 17 other researchers who've had direct contact with these organisms over the past 2 decades. All of them have experienced similar neurological alterations. 17 others. I wasn't alone in this. I want to contact my former colleagues first, Mildred Willis and Grace Murray. That can be arranged. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since entering my apartment. In fact, both Dr. Willis and Ms. Murray are already part of the program. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Dr. Willis has been working with us for 8 years, developing relocation protocols for dormant organisms. Ms. Murray has been designing communication systems based on bioelectric field analysis. Chen pulled out another tablet showing personnel files. They've been waiting for you to join them. I stared at the photos on the screen. Mildred looked older, her hair completely gray now, but her eyes held the same intense focus I remembered. Grace appeared more weathered, with new lines around her eyes, but she was smiling in a way I'd never seen during our original mission. They've been part of this program all along. Dr. Willis joined voluntarily after her Antarctic assignment ended. She'd been experiencing the same neurological changes you have and wanted to understand them. Rodriguez scrolled to another file. Ms. Murray requested transfer to the program after the original mission. She felt responsible for what happened and wanted to help develop better protocols. Better protocols for what? For making contact without causing harm to either the creatures or the humans involved. Chen closed the tablet. Dr. Garcia, the program's real goal isn't to contain these organisms. It's to establish communication with them. I walked back to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. You're trying to talk to them. We're trying to understand what they want, why they're awakening now, what their intentions are, whether coexistence is possible. Rodriguez joined me at the table. Your unique neurological profile suggests you might be the most capable person we have for establishing meaningful contact. The electromagnetic sensation was fading, leaving behind a strange sense of anticipation. What makes you think they want to communicate with us? Because they keep trying. Chen showed me another set of data on her tablet. Every awakening event has been accompanied by structured electromagnetic pulses that suggest intentional communication attempts. The patterns are too complex to be random, too consistent to be coincidental. I studied the wave patterns on the screen. They looked almost like language, rhythmic, repetitive, with variations that suggested meaning. Have you been able to decode any of it? That's where Dr. Willis comes in. She's been working on translation protocols for 6 years. Rodriguez leaned forward. Dr. Garcia, we believe these creatures have been trying to warn us about something. The timing of their awakening events correlates with major environmental changes, rising ocean temperatures, acidification, deep-sea mining operations. They're responding to what we're doing to their habitat. That's our working theory. But we need someone who can establish direct contact to confirm it. Chen put away her tablet. Someone whose nervous system has already been modified to interface with their bioelectric fields. I thought about the storage unit full of evidence, about Sean's article spreading across the internet, about 15 years of silence and isolation. If I agree to this, what happens to Sean? To his story? Mr. Hayes received a similar visit this morning. He's been offered a position as the program's official journalist, documenting our research for eventual public release. Rodriguez smiled again. Assuming we can establish successful communication protocols. You're not trying to suppress the story. Dr. Garcia, the story is already out. Our goal now is to make sure the next chapter doesn't end in disaster for either species. Chen stood up. The choice is yours. Prison, or the chance to be part of the most important scientific endeavor in human history. I looked out the window again, toward the ocean that had changed my life 15 years ago. Somewhere in its depths, ancient intelligences were stirring to life, trying to communicate with a species that had spent centuries treating their home as empty space to be exploited. When do I leave for Hawaii? Tomorrow morning. Dr. Willis and Ms. Murray are expecting you. After the agents left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time. thinking about choices and consequences. I'd spent 15 years believing I was protecting evidence of a government cover-up. Now I was learning that the real story was just beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Looking forward to working together again. We have so much to catch up on. M. Mildred. After all these years, we were going to be a team again. But this time, instead of studying the creatures as specimens, we'd be trying to understand them as neighbors. I started packing, wondering what it would be like to hear that ancient voice in my mind again, and whether this time I'd be able to answer back. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of the Deep Horizon, watching technicians make final adjustments to equipment I never thought I'd see again. The submersible looked almost identical to the one we'd used 15 years ago. But the instruments inside told a different story. Where we'd once carried geological sampling tools, we now had bioelectric field translators. Where we'd once had standard cameras, we now had electromagnetic pulse recorders calibrated to my specific neurological frequency. Nervous? Mildred appeared beside me at the rail, her hair completely silver now, but her eyes still sharp with scientific curiosity. Terrified, I admitted. Last time I made contact with one of these creatures, it changed my brain chemistry permanently. This time, we're doing it on purpose. She laughed, the same dry chuckle I remembered from our late-night data sessions. At least now we understand what's happening. The bioelectric interface isn't random. It's how they've always communicated with each other across oceanic distances. I touched the small device clipped behind my ear, a translator that had taken 6 months to calibrate to my altered neural patterns. And you're sure this thing will work? As sure as I can be without testing it on a creature that could accidentally fry your nervous system. Mildred's honesty was both reassuring and terrifying. But Lexi, the mathematical models are solid. The electromagnetic patterns we've recorded from awakening events show clear linguistic structures. They're not just trying to communicate, they're trying to teach us their language. Grace emerged from the equipment bay, her engineer's precision evident in how she checked each system twice before moving to the next. Translation array is online. Bioelectric field generators are functioning within normal parameters. Emergency surface protocols are programmed and ready. Emergency protocols for what? I asked. For if the creature decides it doesn't want to talk. Grace's expression was serious. Lexi, we've learned a lot about these organisms over the past 6 months. They're not just ancient, they're incredibly powerful. The electromagnetic fields they generate could disable our equipment, or worse if they perceive us as a threat. I looked down at the water, knowing that 3 miles below us, another massive intelligence was waiting. The sonar readings showed it was even larger than the creature we'd found 15 years ago, nearly 4 miles across, and actively generating bioelectric pulses that our surface equipment could detect. What do we know about this one specifically? Mildred consulted her tablet. We've been monitoring it for 3 weeks. The electromagnetic patterns suggest it's been trying to establish contact with something. Possibly us. Possibly other creatures in distant trenches. The pulse frequency matches the mathematical sequences we've identified as their equivalent of a greeting. It's saying hello. It's been saying hello for 3 weeks. We just haven't been able to answer back. Grace finished her equipment check and joined us at the rail. Until now. The submersible Cousteau bobbed gently beside our ship, its hull reinforced with new materials designed to withstand electromagnetic interference. Inside, the communication array represented the most advanced bioelectric translation system ever built, calibrated specifically to interface with my altered brain chemistry. Dr. Garcia. Colonel Cole approached our group, her military bearing unchanged, but her expression more open than I remembered. The dive team is ready when you are. I nodded, surprised by how much my relationship with Cole had evolved. 6 months ago, she'd been the face of government oppression. Now she was the architect of humanity's first diplomatic mission to another species. "Colonel, what are your orders if the creature responds negatively to contact?" "Our orders are to retreat and reassess. No weapons, no aggressive actions, no attempts to collect samples without explicit consent." Cole's voice carried the weight of hard-learned lessons. "Dr. Garcia, the military's position has changed significantly since your original encounter. We've realized that these creatures are too numerous and too powerful to eliminate. Coexistence isn't just ethically preferable, it's our only practical option." Mildred and I exchanged glances. The woman who'd ordered the death of the first creature was now advocating for peaceful contact with its relatives. "How many more have awakened since our story went public?" 17 confirmed awakenings across major trench systems worldwide. Cole pulled out a global map marked with red dots. Each one has been accompanied by structured electromagnetic communications that suggest coordination between organisms separated by thousands of miles. I studied the map, seeing a pattern that made my enhanced electromagnetic sensitivity tingle. "They're talking to each other." "They're organizing," Grace corrected. "The communication patterns show increasing complexity and frequency. Whatever they're planning, it involves multiple creatures acting in coordination." "Planning for what?" Mildred answered. "That's what we're here to find out." The descent took 2 hours, during which I felt the familiar electromagnetic pressure building in my skull. But this time, instead of the chaotic interference I'd experienced 15 years ago, the sensation felt almost musical, rhythmic pulses that seemed to follow mathematical patterns. "Translation array is picking up structured signals," Grace reported from the pilot's seat. "Lexi, are you receiving anything?" I closed my eyes and focused on the sensations in my head. "It knows we're coming. I can feel curiosity, maybe anticipation." "The bioelectric field strength is increasing as we descend," Mildred monitored her instruments. "But it's not random. The pulses are following the same mathematical sequences we identified as greeting patterns." At 2 miles depth, the creature came into view on our external cameras. It was even more magnificent than the first one, a translucent giant spanning the ocean floor, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing in complex rhythms that seemed to respond to our presence. "My God," Grace whispered. "It's beautiful." The electromagnetic sensation in my head suddenly intensified, but instead of pain, I felt something like recognition. Images began flowing through my mind, not the chaotic visions I'd experienced before, but clear, structured communications, ancient oceans teeming with life, massive creatures moving in harmony with currents and tides, a catastrophic event that drove them deep, forcing them to sleep for millions of years, and now, awakening to find their world changed, filled with new life that treated the oceans as empty space to be exploited. "It's showing me their history," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They're not just ancient. They're the original inhabitants of Earth's oceans." The translation device behind my ear began emitting soft tones, converting the bioelectric patterns into something approaching language. Through the speakers, we heard what sounded like whale song mixed with electronic music, hauntingly beautiful and unmistakably intelligent. "Translation matrix is stabilizing," Mildred reported. "We're getting coherent linguistic patterns." The creature's message came through clearly, transmitted directly into my consciousness and simultaneously translated by our equipment. "Small swimmers return. Why do you poison the deep places?" I looked at Grace and Mildred, then activated our response transmitter. "We didn't know you were here. We're trying to learn how to share the oceans without causing harm." The response was immediate.
Your kind spreads death water and noise pain. The deep places grow sick. The small swimmers flee or die.
It's talking about pollution and deep-sea mining, Grace said. The electromagnetic interference from industrial activities must be incredibly disruptive to their communication systems. I transmitted again. We want to stop the harm. Can you teach us how? What followed was the most extraordinary conversation in human history. The creature, who identified itself as something that translated roughly to deep current singer, explained that the awakening events weren't random. The ancient organisms had been monitoring human activities for decades, watching as deep-sea mining, chemical pollution, and electromagnetic interference from shipping disrupted oceanic systems they'd spent millions of years learning to maintain. Your kind learns quickly, but thinks in small time, the creature communicated. We think in ocean time, current time, life cycle time. The deep places need protection for many of your generations. Mildred leaned forward. Ask it about the other creatures. Are they all awakening for the same reason? The answer came with images of a vast network spanning Earth's oceans, dozens of ancient beings connected by bioelectric fields, sharing information across impossible distances. They'd been coordinating their awakening to establish contact with humanity before the damage to their environment became irreversible. We offer partnership, Deep Current Singer continued. Your kind learns to tend the deep places with care. Our kind shares knowledge of ocean currents and life flows. Both kinds survive and grow. I felt tears running down my face as I realized what was happening. This wasn't first contact, it was a job interview. The creatures weren't just offering to coexist with humanity. They were offering to teach us how to be better stewards of the planet we shared. What do you need from us? I transmitted. The response came with mathematical precision. Coordinates of deep-sea mining operations that needed to cease, shipping routes that required modification to reduce electromagnetic interference, and pollution sources that were poisoning the deep ocean currents the creatures used for communication. In return, Deep Current Singer added, we share knowledge of weather patterns, current flows, and life cycles that will help your kind survive the warming time ahead. Grace was frantically taking notes. Lexi, it's offering to help us deal with climate change. These creatures have been managing oceanic systems for millions of years. They understand planetary climate better than we do. The conversation continued for 3 hours, during which we established the framework for humanity's first interspecies treaty. The creatures would share their knowledge of oceanic systems and climate management in exchange for protection of deep-sea environments and modification of human activities that disrupted their communication networks. As we prepared to surface, Deep Current Singer transmitted one final message. The small swimmer who carries our voice patterns will be our speaker to your kind. The connection between us grows stronger with each meeting. I realized it was talking about me, about the neurological changes that had isolated me for 15 years, but now made me uniquely qualified to serve as humanity's first ambassador to an ancient intelligence. Are you ready for that responsibility? Mildred asked as we began our ascent. I thought about the storage unit full of evidence, about Sean's article that had started this whole process, about 15 years of believing I was fighting a government conspiracy when I was actually preparing for this moment. I spent 15 years thinking my story was about exposing the truth, I said. Now I realize it was about learning to listen. As the deep horizon came into view above us, I felt the electromagnetic connection with Deep Current Singer fading, but not disappearing. The creature's presence remained in my mind like a distant song, a reminder that humanity was no longer alone in the oceans. We'd come down here expecting to make contact with an alien intelligence. Instead, we discovered that Earth's oldest inhabitants were offering to teach us how to be better neighbors. The story I'd thought was ending was actually just beginning.